Alright guys, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to give my opinion on what I think is a minimum equipment, commander, both pairing and skill level, and then armament thresholds for you to be competitive when you first get to Season of Conquest, which is Season 4. Like, yes, you could use in-game commanders in Season 3 now, but KVK Form 4 is like a different format, right? For at least as of right now, KVK 4 is going to be Heroic Anthem, which is different from what you played before. Also, you're still grouped in with other younger kingdoms in your region, but like now, like the older migrants who migrated back get to use their end game equipment now, which you probably don't access to, right? So there's that dynamic going on there, and that's also my experience. So if you could get all of this besides the equipment by KVK 3, great. But by KVK 4, I think this is like the minimum necessary to be competitive. Uh, this alley is applicable up to an A seed. So the kingdom I'm in right now is my native kingdom. It's 2844. I play there for all 6 KVKs. We're in KVK 6 now. We were a strong young kingdom where we were an imperium for a young kingdom. We won KVK 1, 2, and 3, right? So by the time we got to KVK 4, we were on the more competitive side. If I remember correctly, within your region, let's just say there's like 40 or 50 kingdoms or whatever, maybe like 25. I don't know how they picked it, but they took the stronger kingdoms in our region and put it in our KVK 4. And they took the weaker kingdoms in that region and put it in a different KVK 4. So I got to play in the stronger one, so this at least applies to that, right? Now, in my opinion, for you to be competitive, that means that the march could trade positive, like fairly easy. Like if you can't trade positive, doesn't mean you can't get kills on it, but it's frustrating to run out in the field, and then two, it's gonna burn through your resources and speed ups a lot faster, and it'll probably be pretty hard for you to get that 30 mil achievement. I think if you have the minimum threshold I'm talking about in KVK 4 and a competitive, on the competitive side, like an A seed side, you could get the 30 mil achievement with 3 marches, provided you're playing relatively smart, and you play a decent amount of time, which is like, I would say like 30 hours for KVK. All right, if you have more marches, it'll be easier. If you have less, you could probably still do it. It just becomes a lot harder. So I think like 3 marches is something to shoot for, and obviously with 3 marches, you want 1 for each troop type: archer, cavalry, and infantry, which I'll go over. Okay, so first let's actually start out with the equipment. So there's a lot going on on the screen. Let's just start on the left. Right. Shout out to Spartan Gaming, which is, I stole this graphic from him, right? So crediting him for making this, or wherever he stole this from. The middle one is where you should be shooting for by the time you get to Season of Conquest, right? So I would say if you finish that top set, maybe by like Kingsland to KVK 1 is reasonable, right? And again, right, if you take like the top set and like, well, you know what? I'm not going to go there, all right? The middle one is where I think you should be, which is basically all purple with the gold chest for Season of Conquest. And then obviously the bottom is more of an end game piece. It's debatable whether that's even the best set now. My point of showing this isn't to get into detail on that. It's just to show on the middle part how much more material it costs versus like how much stats you get with material, right? So a couple of the considerations for upgrading the equipment to a certain point and stopping is that you want health over defense over attack. So if you can switch from attack to health, that's a big win, right? Or if you can, let's just say the blue piece gives you defense, the purple piece, which is the next step up, gives you attack, and then the next step up, the legendary piece, gives you defense again, right? So defense to attack, then the defense again. It makes sense to skip the middle, the attack, so you could just go from the blue to the legendary, right? In this case, with the archer, the reason why you want to go to the legendary chest is because the purple chest, even though it's part of the revival set, gives you attack, and then the next step down is going to be the blue, right? So when you go from the blue to the gold, and then you get to go from, I think, health to a lot more health, it makes sense, right? Whereas, like, let's just say you wanted to upgrade the purple weapon for the archer weapon. The golden age gives you defense. The dragon's breath bow gives you like 3% more defense. Don't quote me on that. I'm just saying a number. I think it's about 3%. Yes, it's an upgrade, But for like that much more legendary material, it would make more sense to upgrade somewhere else where you could get a bigger benefit, if that makes sense. All right, so if you look at the total stats here, right, the total stats is assuming that all the purple is crit, and then all the legendary has iconic in them. And obviously, like as you're getting more and more iconic, if you're making them faster than you could get the iconic, there's no real way to get more iconic other than just doing KVK, which you could, I think, get up to 5 iconic crystals, and then hoping maybe you get lucky and an event shows up where you get an iconic crystals. But those are very sporadic. For the most part now, you're getting your iconic crystals from doing KVK, which is why it's important to do KVK. But if you look at the stats, right, it costs 43 total mats to get this first set. It costs 127.5 to get the second set. To upgrade from the first set to the second set, it will cost you 84 legendary material. And then the cost per stat, this isn't to upgrade, this is overall, right? It costs you 43 mats to get 46.5% of stats. But by the time you get to the second set, it will cost you 127.5 legendary material to get 69.5% of stats. So yes, it's a big stat boost, but the cost of legendary material becomes a lot more. I didn't even bother showing the like iconics when you get up to iconic 5, because that now includes blueprints, and the cost per stat actually is going to go down even further, right? So like this place, the second one, is a great place to stop until you get however many marches you want to that spot before you upgrade further, right? So if I wanted to run an archer, a cav, and infantry, and I got my archer gear to here, it might be time to move on to my cav gear, to give my cav gear to the minimum threshold before I put more into the archer gear. That's the whole idea, right? Or maybe it's time to, instead of putting the gems in the equipment events, maybe I'm putting my gems towards the wheels more to have my commanders kind of catch up. All right, next one, let's go to commanders. So I don't have the names. Oh, I do have the names listed out, but obviously at the top is cavalry, right? Nevsky Joan. The middle is Scipio Luce, infantry, and the bottom is Ziel and Herman for archer. So if you were investing in commanders, I already talked about this in, I think, my last video, right? I would actually recommend you either focus on the infantry or the archer first, just because I think it'll hold up a little bit longer. I'm not actually even sure if another cav commander comes out, whether Nevsky or Joan is going to be the pairing that goes with that commander. And the next cycle that's going to come out of those three is definitely going to be cavs, right? Because we just had archer come out, and before that we had infantry. So the top right, most people are already familiar with this, but I'm just going to go over it real quick. 5511 refers to the skill, right? And then how many sculptures it takes to get that skill to max if you already have the commander unlocks, right? So if I want to get 5511, it's going to cost me 190 sculptures. 3 skills max is going to cost me 380, right? So you can see, like, just to get 4 more points from this first one to the second one, it's going to cost me like another 190 sculptures. So for every one of these commanders, at least at the AC level in your first season of Conquest, I think 5511 is enough. Okay. Of these 6, the only one where it's a little odd is Joan's second best skill is actually her last skill, but to get 5115 is really, really difficult. If you could get it, great, but if not, like it's statistically, it's more likely that you're not going to get 5115 than you are, even if you have a bunch of skill resets. Okay. So usually, and at least for all 6 of these commanders, this is the case. The first skill is your active skill. That's the one you always want. Like, that's your best skill. You always want that max. Most of the time, besides Joan, your second skill will be the second one you want to max, because that's the one that gives you stats, right? So like if you get march speed for all these commanders, which I think besides CL, every one of these commanders give you march speed. That comes on the second stat. Also, you could get health, defense, attack, whatever. That's why if you have 5511, even with Nevsky and Joan, that's good enough to run on the field. Okay. What I'm gonna recommend on this this slide is that if you go for 5551, you're still like not using too many sculptures, but you're making the commanders even more competitive to in a way where I think if you're looking for 3 skills max, this is what I'm having what I put on the screen is what I would recommend. Okay, and the reason why you want the skill max, so for example, the reason why you want Scipio to be 5551 instead of like 5523 or something is because usually for the 3rd skill, and sometimes for the 2nd, but almost all of the 3rd skill, the last point in that skill you get a bigger boost, right? So if you look at Scipio's 3rd skill, from the 1st to 2nd, you get a 2% health bonus, another 2% health bonus to the 2nd to 3rd, then another 2%. But from the 4th one to the 5th one, you get a 4% bonus, right? So like the goal is to kind of stack everything into that skill. So when you get that 5th point, you get a bigger bonus, which is why like you want to do 5551 instead of like 5523. Okay, so Nevsky, expertise is okay. It's actually solid. But the reason why I say worth expertise in is because every single one of his skills is just really good. All right, so it's not necessarily that noticeable if like it's not that obvious if the 3rd skill is better than the 4th skill, but if it's not like clearly different, then it's way easier to max the 3rd skill than the 4th. So that's why, you know, I would recommend 5551 if you were going to max 3 skills. Joan, I already talked about this. Her most valuable skill is the 5th one. The 3rd most valuable skill is the 2nd one. So if you could get her to 5515, great. And then like she would actually be one of the last meta commanders I would expertise. Not that, you know, you don't get more from her expertise. It's just there's other commanders where it makes more sense to expertise them beforehand. Scipio, similar to Nevsky, a worse expertise than Nevsky just because a lot of it depends on the commander he's paired with, right? Like you don't get the silence directly. If you're pairing Scipio with Lucia, you're relying on a Guan somewhere else. So that's why even though his expertise actually is kind of weak, all 4 skills are so good that he's still worth expertising. Lucia, same thing, 3rd and 4th skill is not that, there's not one that's clearly better than the other, but his expertise is transformative. Like Lucia goes from a good commander to a top 3 at worst, maybe in the running for best commander because of his expertise. So like if you had to expertise one commander out of this list, I would actually recommend expertising Lucia first. But if you can get 3 skills max, just 5551. ZL is kind of similar to Nevsky and Scipio. I think all 4 ZL skills really good. There's not a huge difference between the 3rd and 4th one as far as one being better than the other. His expertise is okay. It's better than Scipio's. I think a little bit worse than Nevsky's. He's definitely worth expertising though. I mean, like these commanders are all expertising. When I say worth expertise, it's more like are all 4 skills really good, right? And then Herman actually would be either the last commander or second to last commander you expertise from this list. It looks really cool. Seems like a double skill, like proc, kind of like Jones. But in reality, I think it doesn't proc nearly as often. And really most of his value comes from his first skill and actually his 3rd skill, like spreading the poison even more. Well, actually even the 2nd skill because you get mark speed and like stats, right? So Herman 5551, Joan 5515 would be good enough until you get the other ones expertised. And then the first one you expertise, in my opinion, is going to be Lucia. Right now, if you can't get all 6 of these commanders, you can start kind of filling it in, right? You could have, say, Mehmed as a secondary to Nevsky, Mehmed as a secondary to Lucia, right? You could start mixing and matching. But ideally, if you could get all 6 of these commanders of 5511, even Joan, and pair them together, that's good enough. And that's actually only going to cost you 380 sculptures. All right. Finally, we're going to talk about armaments, right? So kind of like the trifecta is armaments, equipment, and commander. I think this one gets the least amount of attention just because there's so many moving pieces. But I want to just highlight a couple of things here, right? So this is actually a screenshot from my farm. My farm, when I took the screenshot, was 330 days old. So it's a little bit under 11 months, which kind of goes right in line with that 11 months I talked about to start KVK 4, right? So the number here is the total stats. Obviously, there's a difference between health and attack, right? I would prefer health. I'm just kind of simplifying it so you have a number to shoot for. my farm is completely free to play, right? I actually have done a good job. I don't know, maybe I'm a little OCD, but I always send out the dispatches. I always do the travel, but I don't spend any money on this farm. And when I looked, I actually have 5 armament sets where if you include the inscriptions, all the stats come out to about 22% total stats. And this is for a completely free to play farm that I literally just use for farm. It's not a battle farm. I don't use it to do anything. I just, when I see like a dispatch thing, I probably don't need to, I click it. But that's over 11 months, right? So if you look at the armaments I have, this one on the top left, I just got really lucky. I don't remember where I got it, but that's like a top of the top armament. If I could put a hunter inscription on it, that'd be really awesome, but it's too bad that's on my farm, right? This one's a triple stat purple. I even have a triple stat blue in here. You can tell the difference between the purple and the blue. It doesn't really matter if it's purple or blue. If you could get more stats out from a blue than a legendary, then use the blue, right? It's just like for a blue armament, you can't get an inscription on there, which severely limits its upside. Okay, so usually when you have armaments, you want every armament to either be a double or triple stat. Now the reason why is because if you have a legendary inscription you could reroll, and you already have 1 stat or even 0, it's really easy to get a double stat of a legendary inscribed armament with the rerolls. I did the math a few videos ago. It's over 95%. Like if you have 1 stat, right? If you have like a archer attack that's 3% and you lock it and you have 10 rolls, it's over 95% chance that at some point one of these other ones is going to become an archer stat too. So it's almost guaranteed that you could get a double stat when you have an inscribed armament if you already have one of the stat for that troop type. And even if you don't, the percentage is still really high. So if you got lucky, you got a triple stat one, great. If not, you should at least shoot for to have every armament to be at least a double stat armament, right? I'm just going to show you another one. So this one is my Nevsky on my farm too, right? So you can see this one has 2 inscriptions. The top one doesn't. The top one right here, I got 22.2% total stats. This one, even though the base stats is only 18.9, but if I add the robust, which is a 3.5% health, it comes out to 22.4, right? So when I did the math, all 5 of my armament sets on my farm that's 11 months old, that's completely free to play, came out to about 22%, right? Which is why I'm going to set a number. When you get to your first SOC, you should be able to outperform my free to play farm. I think 25% is reasonable, okay? This one I just want to kind of like highlight, right? If you, at first glance, if you look at the top one and the bottom one, it would seem like the bottom one's better, right? But if you dig in a little bit deeper, right, these are both an emblem. The shielded gives you 3.5% defense, and if we're comparing it for cav stats, 1.6% is actually really low for legendary stats. I think the lowest number is 1.5. It could go up to 3.5, but 3.5 plus 1.6, that's actually 5.1% of defense. Whereas like all 3 of these combined only gives you 4.3% of stats, right? The daring will give you 1.5% skill damage, but then right here there's an all damage in the top. All damage, I've heard people talk about how like it could account for about 2 to 3 times whatever that percentage of stats is. So like for example, if a 0.6 all damage comes out, just count it as 1.2% of stats, or it might even be worth 1.8%. I haven't seen the exact math, so I'm just going to take content creators' word for it. But if we just estimate on the low side, let's just say all damage, just multiply that 2, use that number. If I use that here, the top armament will actually give me 6.3% of total stats, whereas the bottom one was going to give me 4.3% plus 1.5% skill damage. Even if you add that to the stats, that becomes 5.8%, right? So the bottom one looks better. For those of you with OCD, it'll feel better to use the bottom one. I don't know if a lot of people are making these mistakes, but if you get these 2, just do a little bit of a math, and the top one will actually give you more of a benefit, right? So I kind of alluded this earlier. I think a solid goal to shoot for for KVK 4 is 25% of total stats, including inscriptions. On my farm, most of my armaments that had like about 22% of stats, they had on average like 2 inscriptions on there to contribute to the stats. So I think it's reasonable to do a little bit better than that. If I looked at my main, I have 6 sets. All of them come out to about 35%. Some a little higher, some a little bit lower. I do know that I put a lot of emphasis on armaments. Even like I've put a lot of emphasis on armaments even since it started. So I think my armaments are on the better side. So I think like for an end game, for most people, 30 to 35% is reasonable. And then kind of like the opportunity cost, right? If you try to go above 35%, so for example, let's just say I come here, right? If I wanted to get the percentage higher and I already have a really good armament, or I'm already at 35%, if I try to reroll, some of the stats when it comes out, it might not actually be a upgrade, right? So it becomes harder and harder to upgrade. And that's why, like, I don't know if getting above 35% is worth it, right? Like I get upgrades here and there occasionally, but it becomes a lot harder to upgrade once you get to like 35% of stats. So this is kind of like the final picture, right? If you do want to take a screenshot of this. So on the left is, I think, the commander pairing as of early January 2024. Those are the commander pairings you should shoot for. That's the best pairing per troop type. I think all of them, when you first get to Season of Conquest, is usable. Like for 5, like you could do 5.5.1.1 for all of them, and it'll be usable. Even Joan, right? Ideally, you could get 5.1.1.5 or something to that effect. But even 5.5.1.1, I think is good enough, right? And then for the Cav, it's going to be all purples, and the first legendary you want for the Cav is going to be the boots, just because the purple gives you attack, whereas when you get to the boots, it actually gives you health. So that's a big upgrade. For the for the infantry, big thing to note here is the blue shield that gives you health, right? The purple gives you attack, and then when you go to the legendary, it gives you attack also. The legendary shield is probably better than this, but just the amount of material you need to spend on there, I don't know if it's worth it. This also helps keep the infantry more tanky, even though they're a little bit slower. But if you have Scipio Luce, they're fast enough. You don't need the shield and the to get the 4-piece movement speed, and it still performs well enough. The biggest thing you want to upgrade with the infantry is this Hope Cloak, because the purple gives you attack. So this defense going to the legendary from the blue is where you want to go. And the same thing with the helmet. The purple helmet gives you attack, but the legendary helmet gives you defense, which is why you want to go here. For the archer, the one that you really need to upgrade is the chest, because this chest gives you health, and then the purple archer gear chest gives you attack, right? So this is a huge upgrade. One thing I forgot to cover is that for the Cav helm, you could actually probably get away with just having a blue helm. I think the Cav helm, the blue helm, gives you defense, and then this purple helm actually gives you attack. And then if you go back to the legendary, it gives you defense again. But the reason why it's not as big of a priority to get the legendary helm for the Cav is because the Cav set isn't that good. So when you're building a Cav set, you're already going to get the chest and the boots to get the 2-piece bonus. That's why, like, when you're usually getting like a KVK gear, people just get the KVK helm, which is a Pride of the Khan, which is going to be a bigger upgrade over the regular legendary, and because since you don't need it to be part of a set. So that's why you see less set helm for Cavs than any of the other helm. Like you see a lot more. I think I just completely butchered that, but you see a lot more like infantry helms for legendary than Cavs helms, just because the infantry helm can become a part of a 4-piece set bonus that will give you a march speed. You don't necessarily have that for the Cavs. All right, kind of covered this earlier already. 25% is like the total stats you want to shoot for Season of Conquest when you first get there. And then end game, I would say 30 to 35%. And also with every one of these accessory slots, fill it with something. You get a blue flag, buying in the Lost Cannon shop for every KVK. You can fill it with purple accessories, so like Delane's Amulet, Silent Trial, Ancient Stratagems, even Wind Scars, just whatever you could kind of get your hands on. You just want to fill it, because having anything is better than nothing. And then once you kind of hit the minimum threshold, I think the best place to actually start focusing on is then to start working on legendary accessories. They're really expensive. They cost 120 legendary material, but the upgrade that you get from them is huge. And one of the bottlenecks when you first get here to Season of Conquest is that you just don't have enough iconic crystals, right? So the stats I showed you earlier are assuming that every legendary has an iconic crystal in there. If it doesn't, for example, the Golden Age with a crit upgraded to a legendary bow, which is a Dragon Breath bow, without a crit, it's not that big of a difference. I want to say it's maybe like 3% of stats, right? But if you could put an iconic in there, it would make more sense. If not, you should just keep focusing on accessories, just because it takes a long time to build. If you have excess iconics, then you kind of start filling some of these out to make them legendaries. If not, just focus on accessories, legendary accessories. So you're not making these upgrades from purple to legendary, but only getting like a minimum upgrade, if that makes sense, right? I think there's people that make guides that are way more in depth for equipment, so you could definitely look at those for the more in depth instructions. But this is kind of the minimum that's universally agreed upon right now. Okay, and then finally, some other considerations I think I talked about, but I'll get a little bit more in detail with. This, I think, is to be competitive in mid A tier, A seed kingdom. I fought in lower tier Imperiums with these. It's good enough. Not saying you'll do the best. Obviously, you want to upgrade better than this, but this is a goal to shoot for. If you're just starting out, I think this is the goal you want to shoot for in 11 months. And if you could get 1 march to this place, then see if you could get 2, 3, up to 5 marches. If I had to prioritize, I think if I could go back in time, right, or I could go back and I'm starting new. One, I want to get my first march here. Then the goal is to get 3 marches here. I actually would probably hold off on working on 5 marches. I would actually get my 3 marches the next tier up above this. So I have 3 quality marches, and then I'll go work on my 4th, 5th, and 6th march. That's just, if I could go back, that's probably what I would do. And some other considerations, you ideally are at VIP 14 or 15. I think VIP 14, you get extra troop capacity, 5%, which is important. All right, because troop capacity just means you do more damage. It makes you more efficient in the field. And then VIP 15, you get 5% march speed. So if you could get those two, it's a good bonus. The next big upgrade as far as impacting your field fighting is getting to VIP 17, where you get 5% all damage. But to get there, it's going to be a lot harder. I think VIP 15 or 14 is like a good goal to shoot for. And obviously, you need to work on your crystal tech. It could get to a reasonable place. It doesn't need to be max, but there's a lot of guys out there to at least just, if you just do that, it'll be competitive enough. And obviously, you kind of at least have to know what you're doing with fighting. I think it's really hard to be competitive fighting on the field. I mean, on your phone. Highly recommend you get you get the PC version, and then when you do fight, you're actually fighting on the PC version. And then a lot of times you're using dot mode, which I already made videos for. Okay, so this will end up being by far the longest video I've made. As always, if you have any comments, I think I've been getting a lot of cool comments in the videos. Leave them. I read all of them, and I'll respond to the ones that I feel like we could have a productive conversation, or at least a response to. And then please, 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 if you got any value from this, like the video. If you're already watching to the end, this is the kind of videos I like to make. Please subscribe so I can put out more content like this. And I think that's it for this video. Hopefully it makes a difference putting everything together. If you're a newer player, or if you're already in Season of Conquest and you don't have these, definitely start working on this. All right. But anyways, that's all for the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.